Well, welcome everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Plastics Unwrapped. Tonight we will be talking about the real story of global plastic pollution, but we will also be talking about hope for the future. My name is Tom Knezovich, and I'm the chairperson of the Nith Valley Eco Boosters. I'm happy to be your host for tonight's event. Now, before we ask our panelists to give their thoughts on the messages presented in the Story of Plastic documentary and some thoughts on hope for the future, we are going to take a look at the short 4-minute version of the Story of Plastic. As you know, the full documentary is 90 minutes long, but this short video does a great job of reminding us about the key messages from the film.
You've probably heard about a giant trash island in the ocean, or that poor sea turtle and the straw. Maybe you've even heard how plastic is being found inside the fish we eat. The plastic crisis gets a lot of attention, but the headlines usually focus on the plastic that ends up in the environment. And that's just part of the story. The truth is, plastic has a whole life cycle that's hidden from view, one that harms people and the planet from start to finish. Let's start at the beginning. Plastic is made from fossil fuels like oil or fracked natural gas. Extracting those fossil fuels and turning them into plastics creates a lot of pollution. Pollution that most often affects marginalized communities nearby. As we've gotten better about using less oil and gas to power our lives, the fossil fuel industry found a lifeline in plastics. In fact, oil and gas companies are doubling down on plastic production, with plans to build or expand over 300 petrochemical plants in the US alone by 2025. But these companies already produce more plastic than we can use. So where's all that plastic going? A lot of it's flowing into new markets, in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Because more than any other product category, plastic isn't driven by the demand for it, but by the supply. Corporations like Unilever, Nestle, and Procter & Gamble are aggressively marketing single-use plastic products around the world. These companies go to places like Indonesia, where I live, and push their products onto communities that just aren't prepared to deal with all that plastic. Maybe they're used to using natural packaging. Maybe they live on a tiny island without a system of waste collection. And on top of that, countries in the global north are shipping their own plastic waste into these countries too. When you add that all up, it's no wonder so much of this plastic ends up in the environment. And globally, that's where a whopping 32% of plastic packaging ends up. 40% goes to a landfill, where plastic just piles up for future generations to deal with. And 14% is incinerated. Incineration is a nasty business, producing toxic smoke and fly ash. These super expensive facilities depend on plastic to burn everything else. It is oil and gas after all. So they want to see more plastic, not less. Yahoo! Then there's recycling. Unfortunately, it's not the solution that many people think it is. Just 14% of plastic packaging gets recycled, and only 2% is effectively recycled, meaning it becomes something as useful as before. The rest is downcycled into something worse. And most recycled plastic is only recycled once, before ending up in landfills, incinerators, or the environment anyway. So it turns out that we can't burn, bury, or recycle our way out of this problem. And we can't just scoop all that plastic out of the environment either. That's like trying to bail out a bathtub with a teaspoon while the tap is on full blast. So how about we turn off the tap by shutting down the plastic machine? That means passing policies that create systemic change. Like phasing out the single-use plastics that pollute the most, ending the fossil fuel subsidies that are fueling big plastic, and holding companies responsible for the plastic waste they create. That's how we can achieve our vision of a zero-waste future, where all of our products and packaging can be reused or repaired, effectively recycled or composted, and ultimately how we create a sustainable, circular economy that works for both people and the planet. Visit storyofplastic.org to learn more and take action.
Next on the agenda, we are going to ask each of our panelists to provide their introductory comments. Each of them has a unique perspective on the plastic problem. We have asked them to share their thoughts on the Story of Plastic documentary, tell us a bit about what they do in their profession or their company, and provide some thoughts on hope for the future. First up is Karen Wersig. Karen is the Plastics Program Manager at Environmental Defense. She has worked as a journalist and as a labor and community organizer. She has participated in her downtown Toronto housing cooperative for more than 20 years. An active transportation enthusiast who favors walking, cycling, and public transit, Karen has never owned a car. She is a voracious reader and has spent her adult life trying to unlearn the common belief that humans should strive for domination over each other, over other animals, and over nature itself. She's passionate about helping to get plastics out of the environment. Over to you, Karen.
So thanks very much for that great introduction. And I took the opportunity to watch the film again. I had watched it a while ago and I watched it again. And it is depressing. At the same time, what I find hopeful in it is that it tells the truth about things. We deal with a lot of greenwashing in this world from powerful corporate interests. And it is important to have a film that kind of exposes the reality of the whole system of plastic and that we live with so closely. So I live in Toronto, which is the treaty territory of the Mississauga of the New Credit. It's also the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe people. And I'm glad to be here from Toronto today. Tom asked us to kind of reflect on the film and the importance of the film. I think really what the Story of Plastic has done is helped put the scale of the plastic pollution crisis on the map. It's a global, it comes from all aspects of the life cycle, from production to the end. We like to call it now, we were just talking about this today, where I work, we like to call it now the death spiral instead of the life cycle. The film explains the full life cycle of plastic from the fossil fuel extraction to waste exports and pollution. And that's really important for us all to keep in mind. Canadians are among the highest users per person of plastic in the world, second only to the US. So we play a significant role both in producing plastic and in using it. And I think what's missing from the film is just putting Canada on the map. As major producers of plastic, we export a lot of it to the United States in its polymer form, but also we export a lot of finished plastic products as well. And we also import a lot of plastic. So it's just important for us to recognize that even though we're not in that film, we're very much on the plastic map of the world. Environmental Defense is a national Canadian environmental advocacy organization. And we're a staff and a board, but we're also tens of thousands of supporters who take action to defend the environment and to support, solid policy improvements to safeguard our environment and improve human health. We're nonpartisan, and we like to focus on facts and work in a collaborative way. So we work with a lot of other environmental groups, and we work with our supporters, and we work with, the politicians who will work with us to actually make our environment cleaner and safer and more healthy for all living things. What we propose in terms of dealing with the plastic issue, and maybe this is where the hope is that so many Canadians and so many people around the world are seized with the problem of plastic pollution and want to contribute to fixing it. And so what we really see as the answer are laws and regulation that require a reduction of plastics at source, that require reuse of packaging and containers, and safe recyclability of plastics. So really, you can see there, that's the waste hierarchy: reduction, reuse, and recycling. And reduction comes first and reuse comes second. And we just want to, we want to say these are not going to happen because individuals do things better, are better at their blue box, and they're not going to happen because corporations voluntarily agree to do things. Things are going to change because there are real laws and regulation in place that requires us all, and in particular, the people who make and profit from plastic, to change their ways. So in presentations, I've learned to put up this slide about what is plastic and why are we swimming in it. But the first question is, what is plastic? Plastic is a synthetic polymer, which means it's a repeated chain of chemical compounds that become this kind of very, very flexible and lightweight material that can be used for a lot of things. And so you may see these numbers. You can see them on the top of this chart, the 1 to 7 numbers with what look to be chasing arrows around them. Frankly, though, we all think that those chasing arrows are recycling symbols. They're not recycling symbols. Those chasing arrows have been used by the petrochemical industry to make us think that the plastic is recyclable. But in fact, those are just the numbers, that the industry understands, the numbers that represent the different polymers. So I won't go through them all here, but there is a chart. It's pretty easy to find on the internet, and it just explains what these different polymers are and what they tend to make, what tends to get made out of them. And I will just say that really the only materials that are truly recycled in the world and in Canada are number one, the PET, which is polyethylene terephthalate. And those tend to be drink containers like water bottles and soda bottles. Those are recycled, especially if they're collected in a deposit return system. And then other rigid bottles that are made out of high density polyethylene, like some milk jugs, shampoo bottles, detergent bottles, those kind of things. So those are really the kinds that are recycled. The rest of the plastic, and even those are not recycled to the majority of the time, but those are the most likely to be recycled. The rest of it's not really recycled at all. And so this is part of why we say we can't count on recycling to solve this problem. Just to understand why it's all around us, it's the overall plastics and chemicals industry, which is a subset of the fossil fuel industry, is a $4 trillion global industry. It's huge. It's 40 billion in Canada alone. And we produce here more than 3 million tons of plastic waste every year, of which 8,000 tons goes into landfills, incinerators, and the environment every day. So that's the numbers, pretty stunning. And what's the story with big plastic? Well, we have 3 of the world's biggest plastic producers right here in Canada, and these 3 companies produce almost all of the plastic the polymers that are produced. They all produce polyethylene. That's really the only polymer that's produced in any great number in Canada. And Nova Chemicals is owned by an investment arm of the Abu Dhabi government, which is a big oil producer. And so, they've gone into chemicals in Canada and plastics. They bought up a former Crown Corporation in Alberta and now call it Nova Chemicals. Dow Chemical, which you may have all heard of, is a US-based multinational chemical company that makes a lot of plastic in Canada. And then Imperial Oil, which you may know from Esso gas stations, but it also is a major plastic producer in Canada. And it's actually two-thirds owned by ExxonMobil, which is one of the biggest oil companies and plastic producers around the world. And these companies make a lot of money doing what they do, which is to flood Canada and flood the world with single-use plastics. And they're suing the federal government to try to stop regulation of plastics as a pollutant. And so Environmental Defense and a couple of other organizations are trying to intervene in that, or have successfully intervened in that court case to bring the public interest into why we need to regulate plastics as a pollutant in this country. So when I said we have to bring Canada into the story, it's just to tell the very short story of plastics in Canada. Really, the industry was established all over the world really, but including in Canada and Sarnia during the Second World War, when there was a need to develop synthetic rubber for tires. And there were lots of public subsidies that went to plastic production in and around Sarnia. And now today, Imperial and Nova produce nearly 1 million tons of plastic pellets there. In neighboring communities, including the Aamjiwnaang First Nation, face higher risk of cancer due to exposure to things like benzene releases in the air. So this story that you see in the story of plastics is very much happening also in Canada, and we need to remember that. So what are we calling for, and what do our supporters call for when they connect with the federal government? We're calling for a ban on the single-use items that comes into effect by the end of this year. Draft regulations were released on Christmas, actually at the end of December, to ban these items. Unfortunately, the coming into force dates in those drafts are very late. It would take 2 years for the bans to fully come into force after the final regulations are published, and we don't expect those before the spring. So it would be at least 2024 before those bans come into play. Way too long. We're asking that they be implemented by the end of 2022. We also want to make it clear that burning plastic, even for energy or fuel, is not recycling. It's incineration, it's dangerous, it's expensive, and it's polluting. And really, if you're burning plastic to create energy or fuel, you're just really supporting this idea that we should continue to make the stuff, that some of it should fly away into the environment, that quite a bit of it should go to landfill, and that some of it might get burned and turned into fuel. So it's really just a pipeline to more plastic production. What we really want to support are alternatives to single-use plastics, like reused containers and packaging and products. And I think we're going to hear more from Kaylee about that soon. But that really is the solution, and that really is the definition of a circular economy that people are talking about, which is it doesn't have to be plastic, but it's any materials we use are used and washed and refilled and used again. That's really the idea, that we should get away from single use. And we also are calling on the federal government to back a binding global treaty that addresses the full life cycle of plastic. So a treaty that doesn't just deal with waste, which is what the industry always likes, but a treaty that starts to coordinate around the world a reduction in plastic production and use. And just because we're sitting here in Ontario, this may not be of interest to everybody on the call. I understand there's people from all around the world, but Ontario is a jurisdiction in Canada. It's the province that we sit in. It's the biggest province by population. And provinces in this country tend to have responsibility for waste issues, for garbage and waste management. And so what we're saying is the Ontario government must ensure that polluters pay for the products that they pollute out into the environment. They must become fully responsible for the end of life of their products. And you may have heard that there are changes coming to our Blue Box program, which is our our curbside recycling program in Canada, in Ontario. Changes are coming to that program, but companies really need to be fully responsible for the end of life of products, and not just from households, but also from all the companies out there, all the industries and institutions. This responsibility needs to cover the whole waterfront, not just households. And the province needs to set very high targets to divert materials from landfill and incineration, to make sure that these materials are actually recycled and turned into the same thing that they were in the first place, in a real circular way. And so that's for plastic, and that's for all materials need to be properly recycled. And a key one that we're calling for is the expansion of deposit return systems, because we know that the best way to ensure a circular system, a circular economy for things like containers, is for the companies that sell them to take them back, to wash them out and refill them. And the best way to do that is through a deposit return system. So I hope I haven't gone too far over my 10 minutes, but that's me, and I'll be happy to take questions later.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Karen. So next up, our next panelist is Kaylee Dale, and Kaylee is the CEO and co-founder of Friendlier, where they're on a mission to replace single-use packaging with reusables. After completing a chemical engineering degree at the University of Waterloo, Kaylee was determined to use her skills to bridge the gap between sustainability and convenience. Her goal with Friendlier is to build a strong circular economy around reuse in Canada. And when I was talking to Kaylee a few days ago, I was mentioning that although I think the film did a good job in a lot of areas, the reuse area, they did mention it, but I know Kaylee's going to talk to us a little bit more about it. And as Karen mentioned, it's a very important part in this whole hope for the future. So I'll turn it over to Kaylee.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll share my screen. I have slides as well. Awesome. So what I thought the film did really well was talking about the linear economy that we're in right now. Kind of that take, make, dispose mindset. We saw this image a lot throughout the movie. And also addressing kind of the global scale of the problem. So even if we can create, you know, really robust recycling programs in North America, if the companies that are producing here are sending products to areas of the world that we don't have those resources, then we're still going to be running into the same issues. So I thought they did a really good job of explaining that piece of it. But I think what was missed, or what could have been expanded on more, was what we should do next. They talked about kind of the circular economy generally, but what we've seen a lot with the solutions that have been proposed so far is that we're running away so quickly from plastic that we're running straight into other problems, and running into problems that are greenwashed and not necessarily real solutions, because at the core of the problem is this linear economy. So we can, you know, swap out the plastic with other materials, and that might be a good first step, but we're going to run into other issues along the line because that only handles the disposal piece of it. You know, if we're using materials that break down more quickly than plastic, that's great because that disposal piece might be, you know, taken care of. We won't have as many issues with pollution per se, but all of the steps to produce, transport, manufacture, you know, extract the raw materials, they're all still going to be there. And so we need to address the entire linear economy and the entire single-use model to really get to the root of the problem. So I just wanted to show this next study just to give some perspective, because oftentimes when we're looking at solutions, we're looking at just straight alternative materials. What can we replace plastic with? So there was a study that was done by the International Journal of Life Cycle Assessment, and they looked at the impact overall of every single step along the way, from raw material extraction to recycling or disposal of different materials for drinking beverage bottles. So they looked at glass, aluminum, and plastic. And the conclusion that they came to is the overall global warming potential of these three products was minimized with plastic bottles. So just to give some perspective, you know, swapping out these materials without actually changing the way we're consuming is going to lead to other problems in the supply chain. And I thought this gave a really good kind of perspective on that, because reuse and recycling was still considered within this study. A big solution that came out a few years ago was biodegradable plastics. Like PLA is a type of plastic that is claims to be biodegradable, and it is biodegradable with the right conditions. So high temperature reactors are required to actually break these materials down in an acceptable amount of time. The issue is that they were marketed as just biodegradable. So what we see, and I'm in the food service industry, is we see these businesses pouring money into these products that they think are really sustainable and they think are making a difference. But really these products can't be accepted in our regional compost facilities for the most part. And they can't be accepted in our recycling streams either. So oftentimes they're just being sent straight to landfill and they won't break down for 100, 150 years. So it's really not addressing the problem. And these, fancy words and claims like biodegradable without sufficient standards in place and without the right infrastructure to actually break them down are really dangerous because it's not really solving any problem at all. And then another thing that we see often is, okay, well, we'll just switch everything to paper products, paper-based. We saw that with straws. Everyone revolted against the plastic straw, which, is a good step. There's many more things to tackle, but the issue is that if we transition everything to paper products like we saw with straws, we're going to have issues in the supply chain with resources. We often think about paper-based products or bio-based products as, they're renewable resources. We can grow them again, but we're consuming at such a high rate and continuing to grow our consumption rates. Currently, a forest the size of the UK is cut down every year from paper or for paper packaging. It's 3.5 billion trees every year, which is huge. And if we continue to, or if we try to transition everything that we are currently making as plastic to paper-based products, we're going to have issues in the supply chain with actually producing these products, because we really need to change the way we're consuming. We can't just swap out the material and continue in this single-use kind of model. So replacing plastics with other single-use materials really isn't the solution. It's just a Band-Aid on the problem, which is the linear economy. I really liked how, I know the screenshot doesn't show the full picture. I screenshotted too early. But I did really like how they explained the circular economies and the different options that are there. They quickly touched on reuse, talked a lot about recycling and compostables. But what they didn't talk about is how we can even go deeper and minimize the impact of those circular loops. This is a really great graphic from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They have a lot of really great resources on circular economies. And this looked at kind of the future of the plastic economy and where we should be going. And so you can see from the left, it goes from virgin feedstock and with a mix of recycling materials into design and production, use. And the smallest circular loop here is reuse. So if we can pull products right after they're used and continue to keep looping them through the system, washing and sanitizing or doing what we need to be able to reuse these products, we can create a really small loop that's less energy intensive. We can create localized programs, so there's not as much transport involved, and we can maintain the quality of the product. So we're not downcycling, like we saw in the video, we're maintaining the value of that product, and we're not having to put in all of that energy required for manufacture and transport. This is another really great graphic. It's from Upstream Solutions Reuse Wins Report. Another great resource, but it just talks about the different benefits of reuse. Because we can create those localized systems, we can create jobs here. Normally, we see products produced everywhere, all over the globe, but with these reuse systems, we can really keep products within a localized system and save a lot of money as well, because we're not having to pay for new raw materials, pay for the manufacturing and transport and everything that goes into it. So it's a really efficient process and a really great way to eliminate both the waste and disposal side of things, but also the raw material extraction and production piece as well. With that being said, with reuse, there's also challenges, and I wanted to touch on that. We have to make sure that when we're producing these durable and reusable products, that we're reusing them enough times to actually make it worth it from a carbon standpoint, water standpoint, and material perspective. If we're producing really heavy and thick products and only using them once or twice before disposal, that's not necessarily the best solution. And this is from a study that was done on plastic bags for milk, which we have in Canada, milk cartons, and jars of milk that are glass. And they did, even after recycling the glass and the cartons, the bags of milk outperformed significantly in terms of energy, water, and GHG emissions. And so I just wanted to give that perspective because it's not a one answer problem. We have to take everything with a grain of salt and really make sure we're using science-based actions and not just, being emotional about certain materials or just, running away from plastics because we think they're the worst, but really looking at all of the inputs and outputs to make sure that we're making the best decisions for all the products that we're producing. A little bit about what we do at Friendlier. Our mission is to simplify the world's transition from single-use to reusable packaging. We've developed a deposit-based system similar to what Karen was talking about earlier. That's data-driven, so we can track the impact of our system. It's affordable because we're reusing those products. We can keep them very competitively priced to disposables today, and versatile, so we can apply it to many different types of packaging. And then to give you a little bit of hope, we've been doing this for just over a year, been in operation for just over a year, and we've already reused over 60,000 products. We have over 85 businesses in Ontario on the program. And when offered a choice between single-use and reusable for a deposit, without much background or knowledge of the system, we see 50% of consumers opt in right away. We hear it time and time again when we're talking to businesses, even the largest chains in Canada. They're saying that the packaging that they're putting their products in is their number one complaint from customers, and they hear that and they're looking for solutions. So as much as it is an industry issue, it is important for consumers to continue pushing and complaining and asking and using their purchasing power for the better and for sustainable solutions, because these brands will listen to what the consumers want, and whatever sells the most, they will produce. So continue to use our buying power as consumers. And that is everything from me.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Kaylee.
Yeah, thanks.
We're going to move on to our third panelist, John Jukes. John is the president of Plastics Redeemed. After a 40-year career in musical instrument retail, John started a room acoustical treatment company in 2009. In the process of developing components for the acoustical products, the idea of a recycled part led to the discovery of a new process for plastic recycling. In 2015, Plastics Redeemed was birthed. At present, the company processes approximately 15 tons of waste plastic a week. Refinement of this recycling process has been challenging. As a result, the company has developed unique machinery and become acquainted with a broad scope of plastics that are not even typically considered in most recycling facilities. John lives in New Hamburg, Ontario with his wife and 2 sons, and he says at the end of his bio, who come for food at times. So I have to assume, John, that you've got a couple of teenage boys who like to perhaps hang out in their rooms a lot of the time and just show up for food. Is that what it is?
Yeah. They're a little older than that, but we throw them raw meat once in a while.
Okay. All right, over to you, John.
Well, good evening. This is fun to be here. It's great listening to the other presenters too. I'm already learning lots. And unlike their presentation, I decided to go with a more organic thing, and I'm going to show you things. So Plastics Redeemed wasn't something I planned to do. It's something that I kind of wandered into, and sometimes life takes you that way, and you end up going a direction and realizing the scope of a problem, such as waste plastic, and to find a real solution is rare. So we've had an opportunity here to do some things that aren't commonly done, and it's been very challenging to do it. We've had a lot of trouble making some things work, but we have accomplished this, and it's pretty exciting. If I had another lifetime to work on this, or if I had started 30 years ago as opposed to 5 or 6 years ago, I could see us being much further than we are. But the potential is there that we can take a little bit of a bite out of the problems we saw in the movie. And you know, there are a number of scenes in the movie that are quite upsetting when you see rivers and whatnot just filled with plastic. So I'm very pleased to tell you I have one possible solution. There are other solutions, and there's a lot of good ideas of what do we actually do with the problem we have with the existing waste. So I'm going to just show you a couple little things we deal with daily, and just to kind of maybe give you a bit of hope that at least we can do something. This is plastic. It feels kind of like paper, and it maybe looks like paper, but it's basically diaper material. Procter & Gamble is one of these big companies, right? And they make diaper-based products. Now, when I say that, you think of baby diapers, yes, but we also have adult diapers now, and we have sanitary napkins. So out of the sanitary napkin division alone, just these little pieces, which are pieces trimmed off of the material that's actually produced, they have 3 million pounds a year out of Ottawa. So we take that and we mix it with other materials and we turn it into our products. Here's another material I'll show you, and this is a screenshot for you. This is a plastic film that's covered in oil. And a big problem with recycling is contamination. So if you take your peanut butter jar and throw it in the blue bin, well, you need to rinse that out and get the peanut butter out of it. This is from the oil change shops. So when they get barrels of oil, they have a plastic liner. Well, guess what? I can get a truckload of that every couple of weeks. And this is just plastic liners from oil change shops, but it's totally contaminated. Nobody else knows what to do with it. They can't landfill it. It's definitely a toxicity problem. And I'm very pleased to say that we can use this and consume it. To show you a different type of material. Now, both those things I showed you are kind of a loose, floppy film. And there's many things in your home, many things you're familiar with from the grocery store that are loose, floppy type products. And there is a big problem with recyclers with that, because you have to change the format of it before you can really reuse it. We're fortunate that we can take it as it is and either shred it or grind it and then run it into our machinery and process it without washing it. And if you watch the film, there was one segment where they talked about washing the plastic and how the inks are a problem. And then what happens with those inks, and you see a shot of it going into a river or, you know, whatever. And that's a real problem. And I'm pleased to say the technology we've been working on does not involve any of that. The inks get consumed along with the plastics. So we have no wash line. And, you know, it's sad to say a lot of recyclers have major environmental challenges to do their recycling. And the Ministry of the Environment in Ontario is very strict about these things. And Ontario is very, very tough on this. But it's a challenge for a recycler who's trying to do the right thing, because their technology doesn't allow for how do you handle this. So I'm pleased to say we've found a process that will deal with that issue. And it's significant, and I'm excited about that, especially when I watched the movie and realized we can deal with a lot of that material. these are little chips. These are shredded pieces of plastic. So if you think of your car bumper, your dashboard in your car, your speedometer, all those things are made of plastic. Now, we deal with a lot of the automotive people. So whether it's General Motors or Toyota or somebody like that, and they are very much, they do not landfill. They are very much about recycling. I'm very pleased about their sustainability projects, and they work very hard at it. But they have a number of things. They just have nowhere to go. They don't know what to do, and they're trying to figure it out. So I got to give those guys credit, at least on the spectrum of people I deal with, and that's what I've experienced. So that's kind of boring to show you that, I guess. I thought it would be more colorful. But little bits of plastic are a big problem, because if something like this falls out of your garbage bag and blows down the street, and it goes down the sewer pipe, or it gets in your grass, it's very, very hard to capture that and deal with it. So I'm just showing you that crude picture of the type of materials we take. And what we do is we heat that up, and we pump it under a lot of pressure, and we form it into profiles. And we're focused on lumber at this point. So we'll make something like this, which in wood terms would be called a 2x2. And there are different applications for this. Now, and you'll see that, it's not perfect. There's a hole in the middle there. This isn't your high-end deck chair or what have you. This is a lower grade of lumber. And we found a unique market in the sense that when you pour cement, when you make a condo in Toronto or a bridge or parts of the road, they need to build a structure so they can form the cement. And they build a structure, put the forms on it, pour the cement into it. The cement dries, you take away the forms, and the waste plastics consumed as part of the cement structure. And that will last at least 100 years, if not longer. So if you imagine a bridge going over the highway, knowing that we're taking some of this waste plastic and reusing it with a long-term life cycle to it, it's not going to get reused for a long, long time. There are many other applications, but that's one I think is a really good application. Now, this particular piece of plastic is an interesting story. With laminate foam, there's a cross-linked foam, and they use it for flooring, and they make millions of feet of this stuff. It's a combination of polyethylene and polypropylene, and nobody can recycle it. There's a company called Toray from Japan. They spent several $1 million trying to recycle it. Well, we discovered our process works on this, and it's kind of exciting, but the foam is so light, the cost of doing it becomes prohibitive. So here's some of the challenges of a plastic recycler myself. There's the cost of transport. There's the cost of managing those formats and getting it to the destination so it can be processed. And these are just some of the stuff we're dealing with. But I am pleased to say we're doing, about 3 tons a day. It's not a lot when you talk about films, the movie talking about millions of pounds of waste and where's it going. But I'm pleased to give you a little bit of hope that here in New Hamburg, we've come up with something unique that is taking all these materials and putting them to another use. I actually worked with Dow for a brief moment. They have a program, the Orange Bag or the Hefty Bag program in the US, and they did a pilot project in London, and we did some testing, and they basically, all they did is they took the loose floppy films that I talked about and diverted them from the Blue Box program. Well, they were incinerating most of it. So I'm not sure what they were really accomplishing, but I guess they were trying. But we managed to take it and turn it into lumber. And this is the kind of look it gave, which was kind of cool. So now that pilot project's done, and I don't know what they're doing. But I say that to give you a little bit of hope that we've discovered a process. We're working very hard to refine it so that our throughput becomes greater and greater. The amount of waste that we're dealing with and we're seeing in the chains we deal with there's no way we can keep up with it, but we're doing something, and there are more ideas being applied to this every day. We primarily deal with the industrial, post-industrial waste. So automotive, food packaging. Food packaging is a huge deal. Food packaging films, so if you go to President's Choice or any grocery store, those films, some of them have 9 layers of different types of plastic. Most people don't know what to do with that. So I'm glad to say we can process that, and we have a place to put that and use it. So I hope that helps you somewhat. I think I gave you an overview of what we're doing with Plastics Redeemed, and I am excited that we are able to contribute to the challenges of what we're dealing with. And I want to do more. It just takes time and a lot of resource, and it's hard work. But I thank you for listening. Thank you for your interest in coming. And I think together we are going to try and make a difference on this. So thanks, Tom. I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, John. And just to let you know, your audio came through perfect. Your video was freezing every once in a while. I don't know if there's any settings you can tweak there or not, but it was fine. It just the important thing was your audio came through fine, so that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So our final panelist for tonight is Gabriel Saunders. Gabriel is a 25-year-old Canadian Turks and Caicos Islander and the co-founder of Decomp. Decomp is a biotechnology startup that seeks to solve plastic waste pollution through utilizing plastic degrading microbes. This past September, Gabriel presented Decomp to North America's top environmental officials at the Commission for Environmental Cooperation's 28th Council session. Following this in October, Gabriel was a panelist at the European Union's delegation to Mexico's Climate Action Conference. So I'm happy to welcome Gabriel, and I think this group tonight is one of the first to hear about this exciting adventure that Gabriel is on with Decomp. So over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I am in the Turks and Caicos Islands right now, and as I like to say every time I am on a call, while our beaches are top in class and the best beaches in the world, our internet is not. So my apologies if there are any delays, if there's any buffering, anything of the sort, but I am using my phone as a hotspot, so fingers crossed that all goes well. Now, I thought the story of plastic did an incredible job talking about each stage of the life cycle of plastic. That's going from production to disposal. As Kaylee mentioned, one thing that we really need to try to do is modify this linear economy, and as much as we can, try to make it more circular. Another point that I like that she mentioned as well is that there is a global warming potential of all of the other materials, and at times it is worse. So what we can't have is an emotional knee-jerk response to tackling plastic waste and looking at plastic as a whole. Because at times, the lightweight and durable characteristics of plastics facilitate them at times being more environmentally friendly than other materials. And again, like she mentioned, when it comes to reusable containers or reusable anything of that sort, we actually need to use those items a specific set number of times to actually gain the benefits of them actually being reusable. So what we do need to realize are that plastics have revolutionized quite a number of different industries. We look at the food and the medical industries. Those are two of the ones that come to mind immediately. They extend the life cycle of things that we consume. They allow people with prosthetic limbs to live a far higher quality life than they would without them. So we can't completely eradicate plastic or turn the tap off of them immediately without having a proper solution that would come right after them. But we do at the same time need to realize that there are a number of negative externalities that are associated with the plastics, as the story of plastic mentioned. For the most part, plastics do get downcycled. That is, the materials that are created from the recycled plastics are not of as high quality as those created from the virgin materials. And as John mentioned, even when we look at some of the plastics and being able to say that they are recyclable, at times the cost of recycling them is just so high that it doesn't even make sense to, because nobody is going to, there's no market for it essentially. There is such a high transportation cost, such a high cost of recycling them, that it makes no sense to recycle there. Now, plastics affect global human and environmental health, as we saw from the production stage to the disposal stage. Now, when it comes to decomp, we're more focused on the latter stages of plastic and the plastic life cycle. Because as we saw in the movie, and as I can explain a little bit more, there are three main methods to deal with plastic waste. And there's essentially facilities that are called material recovery facilities. These are facilities that collect and process your waste. So as I mentioned, they have three main methods. One of them is recycling. Not all plastics or not all plastic resins are recyclable, and only plastics with minimal contamination can be recycled. As a result, only 9% of all plastics have been recycled. You then look at incineration. It's not a clean process at all. I was looking at the Q&A a little bit earlier, and I saw that somebody brought it up. Incineration has become cleaner than it was historically, but it still is a very, very dirty process that results in a ton of toxic emissions and global greenhouse gas emissions. So again, very problematic. And of course, the toxic emissions that come from them, as I mentioned, those have very adverse health effects on communities. We saw this in the story of plastic, where we saw that people living in specific communities near those incinerators have their lifespans reduced. They're at a higher risk of developing different forms of cancers and various other illnesses. And the last one is landfilling. Of course, as we know, land is a finite resource, and we cannot continue using land for landfill. One thing when we look at it as well, I don't believe that the story of plastic mentioned, or at least I cannot remember it, but there is a leachate that comes from all of the waste. And the microplastics are actually able to leach into our environment and eventually leach into our waterways straight from a landfill. This is even with those very high-tech landfills that have protective barriers. A leachate still forms and is able to get through those. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create that alternative way of dealing with plastic waste. So upon doing research, we were able to identify plastic degrading microbes. These are fungi and bacteria that have the capabilities of being able to degrade different types of plastic resins. So we first came up with this idea in at the latter stages of 2019, December 2019. We pitched it for a pitch competition. And after winning that pitch competition, decided to take it more seriously in January 2020. And the whole idea of decomposition, we're looking to genetically modify these microbes to increase their effectiveness and their efficiency with degrading these different plastics. So we're looking at trying to degrade LDPE first because it is a softer plastic. But we had to do quite a bit of research speaking to those material recovery facilities to figure out what plastic we should tackle first. We didn't just jump to LDPE. From our research and from speaking with them, we learned that there was no need for us to tackle PET or HDPE. These are plastics that are very easy to recycle, and there is a market for them. But LDPE is one of those plastics that is far more problematic for commerce. There is no market for them at all. And I would love to hear John talk about LDPE and working with LDPE afterwards to hear some of his thoughts on it. So we thought we'd tackle LDPE first. And looking at it, it's a $2 billion market, which shows you the sheer size of looking at one plastic alone. Now, a question that we get quite often are, what are your byproducts? What are your end products? Now, depending on the plastics that we're tackling, depending on the microbes utilized, those byproducts and those end products will consist of biogas as well as biomass. And now this biomass can be utilized as a soil conditioner, which ties right back into the whole circular economy. And from our work so far, we have a number of different MRFs who have expressed interest in pilot projects. And we actually have a pilot project with a Canadian MRF planned for later on in 2022 after we complete some more of our testing. So what we do is we seek to work with more MRFs, as well as the fast-moving consumer goods industry and the consumer packaged goods industries, to assist them with meeting their diversion rate mandates, their extended producer responsibility mandates, as well as their individual responsibility mandates. So I hope that gives you some more hope there for the latter stages of dealing with plastic.
Great, thank you very much, Gabriel. And just to clarify, you mentioned MRFs a couple times. I believe that's municipal recycling facilities. Have I got that right?
Sorry, it is a material recovery facility.
Okay, great, super. Thanks very much.
No worries.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to turn on their videos, and I guess you can keep your audio muted for now. I'm going to ask Garner Matthews to join us, and I'm not sure if it's just Garner or Garner and Stephanie. As I mentioned earlier, Garner and Stephanie have been working in the background, dealing with questions that have been submitted ahead of time, and also questions that have been coming in tonight. So we appreciate everybody who's taken the time to send in some questions. As I mentioned earlier, what we're going to do, we're going to ask Garner now to lead us through some of those questions, and we'll be trying to answer as many as we can tonight. I wanted to make one comment about sometimes questions come in that are quite complex or quite difficult, or we don't have the person here that has the expertise to be able to answer it in full. And if that does happen, I'm just going to ask Garner to make note of a question that perhaps we couldn't answer or couldn't answer it fully. And we'll see if we can do some additional follow-up after the event today, and see if we can get you an answer and try to get that out in the email that we send out, or in a further communication to everybody that's attended today. But we will try to do our best today. And panelists, I'll just remind you too, if there's a conversation going on and you want to jump in, you know that you've got that raise hand function at the bottom there that you can just click that, and then Garner will know that somebody else wants to jump in and join the conversation. So I'm going to turn things over to Garner, who's the keeper of the questions. And I feel like this is like a game show on TV or something at this point, but I'll turn it over to you, and let's tackle as many questions as we can.
That sounds good. And yeah, like Tom said, so we've figured out who would be answering these questions. So I'll be directing questions to each of you, but if anybody wants to jump in on any of them, then feel free to do so. So the first question here will go to Gabriel. Is there any type of plastic waste that your technology cannot break down, and what waste is it ideal to break down?
So we're still early stage. We're an early stage biotech company.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of being used commercially, we're not being used commercially as yet, but LDPE will be the first plastic that we tackle, and our testing will begin as a matter of fact later on this month. But we do seek to tackle, as I mentioned, LDPE first. So looking at plastic bags and other LDPE materials. Okay.
So is your technology, is it a novel technology that you've developed, or is it a company built around an existing technology?
So as I mentioned, we are early stage. What we've identified are fungi and bacteria that have the natural capabilities of being able to degrade these different types of plastic resins. What we seek to do is to genetically modify LDPE degrading microbes to be more efficient and more effective in their process of degrading LDPE.
Okay. Okay, then that leads into, Gabriel, your question to John about, John, whether your company deals with LDPE, and if it does, then how are you doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually process a fair amount. Some people also call linear low in that grouping. It's part of the ethylene family. So you have polyethylenes, you have high density and you have low density, and there's a mid density a little bit. The melt point of plastics varies depending on the type. So if you have nylon is a higher melt point. PET is a higher melt point. Polyester and PET are kind of related, and they're difficult because they're higher and they kind of shrivel up, but they don't behave. The polyethylene, the linear low or the low density polyethylene, actually is one of the best for us to process because when it melts, it flows nicely. And what I didn't outline is what we're doing that's unique is we're actually mixing multiple plastics together. So we're actually using polypro, we're using polyethylene, we're using a bit of nylon, we actually have rubber sometimes, we have foam, and all of these things are coming together to put in our lumber products. So yes, the quick answer is we're using polyethylene and it's been successful.
Very nice. Next question is for Karen. What plastics and packaging are the ones that we should be avoiding most?
Well, I mean, the types of plastics, it gets complicated and it's hard to tell. Often you can't really tell what plastic is in the packaging. Like there is polyvinyl chloride in packaging, which should not exist, but it's hard to see it. So if you know there's polyvinyl chloride in any packaging you're buying, you should avoid that at all costs. You should also avoid any kind of expanded polystyrene, that stuff that blows away, that looks like what we call styrofoam. Just avoid that if you can, like the plague. But I think in general, what I would suggest is avoid single-use packaging wherever possible. Bring your own bags, bring your own produce bags to the grocery store, obviously bring your own shopping bags to the grocery store. I've seen it in the chat, these questions about, yeah, if you can find places where you can bring your own containers, if you have time, I mean, do that. We hope to see a real expansion of these kind of refilling options in the near future. And avoid over packaging. You know, like if you're see something in the store and it just has a lot of packaging, then maybe don't buy it and maybe comment to the company later if you want to. Like, I didn't buy that because it was overpackaged. That I would start there. But I think what we also tell people is we're not going to solve all this stuff individually. Like, we can make good choices and we can individually live our lives with less plastic. But really, for any of this to change, we need proper regulations to kind of frame it. So actually, the federal regulations that are coming around single-use plastics, for example, the drafts are quite good on saying if you're making takeout containers, you can't use polyvinyl chloride or expanded polystyrene. So then that stops being a choice for us. That's just not available, and that's not sort of put upon us. So that would be great, right? That's sort of what we're saying, is that we need a framework in which we're buying things, because our individual choices in the grocery store, how many times have you grabbed the wrong milk because you thought, oh, I'm getting 2%, and then you grab the 1.5 or whatever, or the 4, or whatever. Like, this is what'll happen when we're in the store trying to pick out the good packaging. Inevitably, we'll read the wrong number on it and bring the wrong thing home, and that's okay. That's not our fault. So that's what I would say. So really, we need a better framework for how packaging is used, a better regulatory framework for how packaging is used and what is allowed.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I just wanted to say early on, I'm still a little green, but I didn't know anything in the first days. And we encountered PVC, or polyvinyl chloride, that you mentioned. And I discovered that was akin to mustard gas in World War I. That was a derivative that the Germans used in the war. And we got some PVC in our process, and it was terrible. And it made your eyes burn, and it's nasty, nasty stuff. We avoid it like the plague. I never want to see it again. Just wanted to throw that in there.
That was actually another question that I was going to ask you that we had come in, was why you aren't recycling PVC. So that definitely covers that. Go ahead, Gabriel.
One quick thing that I did want to touch on is that Karen is totally right. At times, packaging is right in our hands. Think of how many times you go to a grocery store and you're in the fruit and vegetable section, and you go and you grab those little thin plastic bags and put some bananas in them or onions in them. And think of it. These fruits and vegetables have a natural protective layer. You're not, I don't know anybody who eats banana peels, but we're likely going to unpeel those bananas before you eat them. There's no need to put them in those plastic bags, but it's something that we have developed a habit of doing, and we need to essentially get out of that habit. So I totally agree with Karen there. What we do need to do is try to figure out how to break out of those hard habits and realize that wherever we can reduce using plastic packaging, especially when it's in our own hands, we need to do just that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Definitely about the bananas. I don't know if I've ever put things in a banana in a plastic bag, but I've definitely caught myself doing that with other fruits and veggies where I'm like, what am I doing here? So next question's for Kaylee. What is the most common reasons restaurants would give you for not wanting to participate in the program?
So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I kind of touched on the greenwashing thing. We've encountered, restaurants that have put a lot of money into products that they think are really good. And so, they don't want to listen because they're like, I have the best thing. Or, sometimes they think I have a recyclable container. So what more could I need? Like, I'm contributing, it's recyclable. And I think that's the biggest thing is people aren't informed and they don't know that it's an issue. Or they're questioning whether their consumers would care about this and want this. So that's again where, telling the businesses that you shop from, obviously that's maybe at the local level, but continuing to have voices heard and pushing for better packaging is helpful for companies like us.
This next question I'll direct to Karen, but you guys have all touched on it in some way, so I'm sure you can all jump in on it as well. What kinds of plastics could there be in a circular economy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that the phrase I hate the most in this whole circular economy discussion is a circular economy for plastics. There is maybe room for some plastic in the circular economy. I think Kaylee uses plastic takeout containers because they're lightweight and convenient and can be washed many, many, many times. But we never want to talk about a circular economy for plastics. We want to talk about a circular economy and then figure out what fits best into it. I would say that a true circular economy means that you're using something many, many, many times. And then when it can't be used that way anymore, it's being repaired or recycled into the same thing that you've been using it for, or into something better potentially, but that will also be captured at the end of life. And so I would say from what I know today, the plastics that are most likely to survive in a true circular economy, PET may be one of them, although there are, it's not the best plastic. And some of these plastics, like polyethylene in its rigid form and polypropylene, are also sturdy and can be used many, many times. I think we do have to figure out the recycling process for those. I mean, John's project is interesting, but it's not circular, right? You take a bunch of plastic garbage and you turn it into lumber, and you're never going to capture that lumber again. And unfortunately, what's partly going to happen with that lumber is it's going to decompose in the sun. It's going to off gas. And ultimately, it is more likely than not to end up in landfill or an incinerator. So that is not, it's good in terms of we're keeping it out of the oceans for now, but I don't think it is a final solution for plastics. And so what we should figure out is using plastics that can actually be used many, many, many times, captured in a system that is closed so that we know like this plastic container that has been a takeout container is not coming in with a vehicle oil container and cross-contaminating. Like it's all coming from the same place. It's all had the same food in it. And those containers possibly are not contaminated with any other toxic additives, and those can be recycled safely back into food containers. But I can tell you today, we do not have that system. We don't have a system to capture all those containers, and we don't have a system. There's no facility that will produce clean, polypropylene containers or clean HDPE containers. There is one case in Canada that we know of where PET, which are the plastic water bottles, are actually being turned back into plastic water bottles. But again, why are we drinking water out of plastic? Like, it's great that it's happening, but why is it even happening? So really the next frontier is to figure out, if we're going to have a circular economy, where does plastic fit, and how can we capture it and recycle it safely without cross-contaminating it with all kinds of other pollutants? And I can tell you right now, what comes through our blue boxes will all be cross-contaminated and probably is unlikely to be food safe. So will not likely leak, because most of the packaging that goes into our blue boxes is food packaging. Right now, it's not going to come back to us as food packaging in a recycled form. So sorry, that's a long answer. I hope that was helpful.
No, that was, and actually, John, I'll maybe turn it over to you, because Karen touched on the cross-contamination aspect, and what I kind of got from your presentation there is that it sounds like you're pulling plastics from producers or large groups of the same types of plastics. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that supply chain, type of supply chain, could fit into a more circular model.
Well, I want to address what Karen said, and she's right. We are looking at markets and profiles to produce a product that would get reused or have a very, very long life cycle. So this product, we're looking at 100 years, which is pretty good. It's not perfect. We've come up with some custom products, and it's the whole deposit and return system is what we want to do, but we're having trouble with the consumer or the companies involved to set up that infrastructure. So that's a challenge we're trying to work through. And if you guys have some ideas on that, I'm all ears. As far as our sources, we're taking what automotive and food packaging and variety of companies like that they have nowhere else to go with. So they may have companies that take a food package and maybe does something else with it, but we're taking the stuff that no one else can use. So in a sense, we're a bottom feeder, if you want to look at it that way. And when we first started, a friend of mine gave me the analogy. Apparently there's a book, I can't remember the name of the book, but in Japan, there was a steel company that wanted to get in the game, and they had all these big steel companies. And so this little wee tiny little company said, well, we're going to make rebar because everybody doesn't like rebar. It's the lowest form of the steel industry. They learned how to make rebar really well. Next thing they knew, they were making all the rebar for all these big guys, and they became very good at it. And we're kind of taking a little bit of that philosophy. We've identified a niche area of waste plastic that is either being landfilled or shouldn't be landfilled, and we're diverting it into a product with a long life cycle. And we're also trying to create new products that would be a deposit and return type of thing. And we're looking for volume. We're looking for large types of things. So when we can ship thousands and thousands of pounds, because we have to compete with the millions of pounds of waste. So we're trying to divert as much as we can. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe Kaylee, I'll get you to touch on the deposit and return aspect. So it's been mentioned, and you've talked about what you're doing now, but where do you see that growing in the future into other products? Do you see it growing beyond food packaging? And can you just talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, we're talking to a lot of different people in different areas right now because we're trying to build a really robust system that's focused on deposit returns and getting them back and getting them to where they need to go, whether that be reused or recycled or whatnot. And so I think you're never going to have, the best returns or the most efficient system if you're just asking people to do it out of the good of their heart, because as much as you or I might do it because we love the environment and we want to be sustainable, not everyone is like that. And having that monetary incentive, we've seen it with the alcohol bottle system in Ontario, and in Europe they have water bottle return systems. I'm sure lots of other places as well, but that's just where I've seen it. And we've seen them work really, really well and be able to achieve 90% or higher return rates. So it's definitely something that's been proven out, and now we just need to be able to streamline the process and create really robust systems around it so that you're not having to lug all of your empty packaging, to the beer store. We have systems in place for that.
Okay, next question is for Gabriel. So you mentioned a little bit about incineration, that there was a question in the chat as well about the difference in incineration between Europe and North America. I was just wondering if you could maybe touch on that a little bit more. What are the differences between the European and North American incinerators, and is it a technical or is it a regulatory difference?
So sorry, I did hear some of that. I got the majority. It seemed like your question is what are the differences between North American incinerators and European incinerators?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if I was cutting out, but yeah, that's the crux of it.
Okay, so right off the bat, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on all of these different incinerators, but what I did touch on though is that no matter what incinerators we're looking at, it's not a clean process. So I'm not sure if European incinerators are, or their systems are cleaner than North American systems, but regardless of the fact that if that seems to be true, no incineration process is clean. We saw that in the story of plastics. You can see that from other forms of research. I believe almost all of us have mentioned it on this panel as well. I know Karen definitely mentioned it. It's just not a clean process. So you do have people, and you do have the that industry in particular trying to push more incineration and talk about it being, I believe it's waste to energy. But regardless of it, you still have the toxic gas emissions and you still have the greenhouse gas emissions as well. So that would be all I'd really touch on right there, the fact that it is not a clean process.
Yeah, it's great. And Karen, you wanted to touch on this as well?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say, I think the real difference is between Europe and North America is regulation. So, the more regulation there is, the more scrubbers, the more expensive it is. And Europeans pay a lot for incineration because they don't have the land base for landfill. But the real problem is, why are we creating this waste in the first place? And landfills aren't fantastic either, right? There's leachate from landfills. There are greenhouse gas emissions that come from things breaking down in landfills. But what landfills don't do is, when you combust things that include like polyvinyl chloride, that terrible plastic, which is in all landfills, and batteries and all the kind of stuff that would go into an incinerator, which is the same stuff that goes into a landfill, frankly. When you have all that stuff in there, it produces, because of the heat, it produces new things. And very carcinogenic things that then come out the other end of that process, both in the air and then also in the solids that come out. And so the problem, I would say, with incineration, they're so expensive once you build it. And this is also true for what they call advanced recycling. Somebody asked, I think in the Q&A also about pyrolysis or gasification. These are forms of incineration. Of course, they use different levels of oxygen and different heats, but they're actually all ways of kind of thermally treating, if you want, heating, burning waste and making things out of it, whether it's steam for energy or sometimes they produce fuel or chemicals. But the problem is those are very expensive to build. And once you build it, you need the constant stream of garbage that goes into it. And those facilities, as they pointed out in the film, they like plastic because it's egg full of carbon and you know, has a high heat caloric content for burning. And so what you're saying by building one of those machines is we're going to still then want to have all this throwaway plastic. Some of it will end up in that big expensive machine. And as we know with plastic today, a certain amount of it's going to end up blowing away in the environment, right? Because that's what happens when we create all this single-use garbage. It becomes litter, enough of it. And also these facilities are so expensive. Incinerators are expensive. They'll never take all the waste because we will never be able to pay. We will have to stop having healthcare if we wanted to pay for enough incinerators for this stuff. So we'll never have enough incinerators. There still will be, you know, waste exports to other countries and landfill. And so what we're saying when we build one of those things is we're okay to keep making this stuff and having it end up in the environment and breathing it in, or having the landfill in the sky, as some people call incineration. I mean, that is the real problem. We will not have a technical fix through heat, through thermal treatment of this waste in most cases, right? Technical fixes are going to be limited, and that's why we actually need to limit the amount of waste we create in the first place.
Okay, so Kaylee, how many times can one of your containers be reused? And what happens to your reusable containers once they, you know, crack or break and can no longer be used?
Yeah, good question. So our containers, we've only been doing this for a year. So we haven't reached the end of the life for most of them in kind of the real life application that we're seeing. They've been tested by a third party for over 100 times in a heavy reuse cycle. And they stopped the testing after that because it was a lot of things to do. But so the quick answer is tested for 100 times, but we're still doing the real life test right now, kind of out in the real world. And for any of our containers that are, you know, defective or have an issue with them, it's, from what we've seen coming back, it's less than 4%. That's kind of the absolute max we've seen, generally much lower than that. And we have a recycling partner in that's local to us nearby, that we bring all of our damaged products to. And because we sanitize them and everything is kind of pure, you know, of our product, they actually treat it as pre-consumer recycled product. So while it's still not getting manufactured into a new container, it can at least be used for more things. So it's the first step. We still have a long way to go to get, you know, to the point where it can be 100% circular there. But the best we can do for where we're at now.
Yeah, an improvement. That's all we can ask for at this point. Karen?
Just quickly, like if we could scale up, help, if the federal government, I say we, if the federal government could help scale up what companies like Kaylee's does, we could have, what John is saying is you need a critical mass of stuff to make it worthwhile. If we could scale up what Kaylee's doing, we would have all this great single sourced material at end of life. Maybe there would be a recycling solution for it. Right now, we don't have a system that there's nobody's going to build that kind of infrastructure because we don't have a way to feed it at the moment. But so I think if we could build this return system that gives us good materials, then we would have a recycling system that could be more truly circular, right?
Yeah, Kaylee, you wanted to touch on it again?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to Karen's point, just in terms of the support that are out there for, you know, startup companies like ours. There's not a lot from the government. You know, everyone always thinks like, wow, you must be getting so many grants. And there are a few out there, but it's not what you would expect. And when I go searching for grants, I find a lot for oil and gas subsidies, you know, oil and gas companies, and nothing, you know, for us. And it's really not what you would expect. And it's shocking, really.
Yeah, I think that would surprise a lot of people. So I'll direct this to Karen, but John, you can probably take it from the other end of the spectrum. How do we get all raw material suppliers and product manufacturers to be part of the circular economy by taking full responsibility for the entire life cycle of their products?
Yes, good question. So part of the answer, the Ontario government, for example, has the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, which if there were very tight regulations for things like packaging waste or tires, or there should be clothing should be included under that. If we had very tight regulations that required those companies to take those things back and not send them to landfill or export them to somewhere else or burn them in any way, shape, or form, what that would do is force those companies to figure out, or pay large fines if they do that. That would force those companies to figure out how to make a truly circular design for their products and packaging. And the other thing that's coming, the federal government is looking at recycled content rules. And so if for plastics only, because they've only regulated plastics, but if companies need to find recycled plastic to make their new materials or new packaging or their new products, that's going to drive what kind of packaging they're going to use in the first place. Because if you're using non-recyclable packaging, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot, because it means you're not providing any material that could be recycled later. So some of that might drive, if it's done well, it should drive redesign of packaging as well. I would just say the shorter answer is we need tighter regulations on all of this stuff. And we need companies to fully be responsible for those things under regulation and pay big fines if they can't meet the targets that are set for them.
Yeah, so then John, from your end of the supply chain, what would help you as a user of the plastic waste to be able to do more with it?
Well, there's so many markets and products and different types of plastic. You could talk about that for a long time. But if there wasn't so much laminated plastic, where it was one form of plastic, so if a container is going to be PET, make it all PET, and make a food grade ink that isn't toxic. And I probably have questions for Karen, but early water bottles, from what I understood, the cap was a different plastic than the bottle, and then the label was a problem. So a lot of people weren't recycling these water bottles because they couldn't. And to get that little ring off, once you take the cap off, was a different plastic. Well, make it the same plastic and don't make the label toxic or problematic. Make it so it, if we can sign government deals in invisible ink, we should be able to do this. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, as far as government regulations, and maybe this is a point I'd like to defer back to Karen, my understanding is the Ontario government did this extended producer responsibility thing last year, and that was actually mentioned in the film, that we need EPR. And my understanding of that is that corporations are now having to foot 100% of the bill for the Blue Box program in Ontario. And by forcing them to pay for that program, it's going to force them to rethink what they're using for their packaging. So we've actually had inquiries. It's funny. If I was to call up General Motors and say, hey, I'd take your waste plastic, it would take you 20 years to get to the right person. But if you kind of do your thing and you come up with something unique and the word kind of gets out of there, all of a sudden you get the phone call from General Motors saying, hey, can you come and see us? We have some waste plastic we need to talk to you about. That's exciting. When they start calling me, it's also depressing because it means they don't know where else to go, because there should be 16 of me in Ontario doing this, right? Karen, do you have anything else you could expand upon for that extended producer responsibility law that Ontario put in?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, if they're responsible for the cost of the program, they should improve their packaging. I think because because it's still so cheap to landfill, and because the targets for diverting from landfill and incineration are so low, they may just take on the full cost. And it's about $300 million a year for the Blue Box program. So they may, and they pay 50% of it now. So they may just take on the full cost and call it a cost of doing business, unfortunately. And that alone may not drive a change in behavior. So I think they need to, right now, under that plan, the targets for plastics recycling are very low. So only 40% for films, for the flexible plastics, that LDPE, and only 60% for rigid plastics. So that means, you know, the majority of plastic really will still end up not being diverted under these current Blue Box rules. And that's only from our household bins. The other problem with the current rules in Ontario is it doesn't cover nearly 2/3 of the waste that's created in the province that flows through businesses, retail stores, restaurants, hospitals, schools, all those things, and industries, malls, all those things, private apartment buildings, even. All those things are outside the law, which means that 2/3 of the waste in Ontario is not even covered. So I think we're not at the point yet with those rules. We hope to help, like, force an improvement. Unfortunately, the government we have right now is not very open to hearing from us about how to improve that program. But, and unfortunately, somebody's asked about deposit return too. We should have deposit return on many more containers than we have in Ontario. Right now, it's only alcoholic beverage containers. But there's a big lobby against that, because companies know as soon as they're responsible for taking the stuff back, the cost is on them. And to be honest, right now, the cost is on all of us, because we pay for it. We subsidize litter collection, we subsidize waste management, and we pay through the environment, like the cost to the environment, right? So anyway, we need tighter rules on all of these things to make those design decisions really affected by the producers. But hopefully we'll get there.
And Gabriel, you, I'm not sure which part, we jumped across a few different topics there, but I saw you had your hand up, so I want to give you the chance to jump in.
There were actually quite a number. I love the fact that Karen was really banging on looking at those particular requirements that we want, and the fact that they need to be a lot stricter. So of course, diversion rate mandates is a huge component of decomp. It's really what a lot of our business model is built around. And of course, we've had to conduct customer discovery interviews. And there were some times where I've been speaking to MRFs, like, what are your diversion rate mandates? What is your residual rate? At times they're saying to me, only 1% of the plastics that come through it go to landfills. I'm thinking, how is that possible? How is that only 1% are going to landfills? That makes no sense to me. And upon probing and asking more questions, what I'm finding out is that they have particular agreements with municipalities where they only need to collect particular types of plastics. And they're allowed to send other plastics to landfills, but that's not considered a part of their diversion rate mandate. So upon having a meeting with one of my advisors, once I heard of that, I was laughing in the meeting thinking, it's the equivalent of writing a test, but only getting marked on the questions that you answered. It doesn't make any sense, because if you have a test, there are 100 questions on it, and you can only answer 50, and you go and you answer those 50, you get 49 right, that should not be your real grade. You should be marked out of the 100. So we definitely need to see tighter requirements and tighter regulations there. We also need to see that more on the extended producer responsibility. I believe we're seeing more individual producer responsibility as well. Imagine if some of these regulations were put in place for today. We would see these companies would get their act together. We need to see things that are a little bit more tighter, where you will have, your Coca-Colas of the world saying, we need to have a pilot project with X, Y, and Z startup, because they will be able to assist us with meeting our individual producer responsibility mandates. But as long as you have the subsidies on one end going to the oil and gas industry, but not on the other end with startups trying to tackle the issues, we're going to keep seeing this problem.
So Kaylee, you mentioned about the the limited amount of government grants and other sources of funding that you've found so far. So we had a question here about what the biggest challenges that you've faced getting your business up and running, and what is your biggest challenge today? And Gabriel, I'm sure you can jump in on this as well. And John, I know you're more of a mature business, but I'm sure you can speak to the same sorts of things.
Yeah, so I would say the obvious thing is COVID, just because we started right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so being in the food service industry is a little bit of a roller coaster with things going up and down. But beyond that, I think when we're talking to large companies, they are, doing these sustainability projects, they're interested in it. But it's very much a side project. It's not, their core focus. And so we've seen a lot of delays in projects, a lot of things kind of getting pushed to the side because it's not their main focus. They're not scared. The single-use plastic ban has been threatened so many times and then nothing's moving. So they're not worried about it. And it's not a primary focus for them. So it's kind of we'll keep talking, we'll figure things out. But it's a really, really slow process because there's no urgency to it.
You want me to jump in here?
Sure.
My experience with getting grants is very frustrating. I went through a process where I was awarded a grant by the federal government after 8 months of writing and much time and effort, only to be audited after being awarded the contract. And they basically stripped it down to about 10% of what they had originally promised. So I spent 1.5 years working on this project. I delayed beginning another machine for 10 months because of the promise of this project, all for naught. So I'm not looking out for handouts anymore. We just got to do business, and at the end of the day, there is no free lunch. You just have to grit your teeth and do it.
I agree with John completely there. At times, you just have to find ways of making your startup or your business happen. And I'm certain that Kaylee knows those challenges starting in the pandemic, the same thing with us. So the biggest issue that we had is we were supposed to onboard into a lab in March 2020. This was right as the pandemic hit. It was originally supposed to be in February, and then it got pushed back because of some changes with the lab space that we were supposed to move into. It got pushed back until March. The pandemic hits. It's like, okay, well, fingers crossed it'll be April. Fingers crossed it'll be May. Fingers crossed it'll be sometime summer 2020. All of a sudden we look, it's 2021. We end up joining another incubator trying to get into their lab space. Oh no, we're working virtually right now, but possibly in the next semester. We just kept hearing the next semester, the next semester, the next semester. Thinking, we've been working on this for X amount of time, and we still have not been able to get into lab space. Like, come on, this is crazy. So we thought, you know what, why don't we go back to the MERS? Those same ones that we conducted customer discovery interviews with. They're excited about what we're working on. They're excited to see this come to fruition. So our whole mindset was, we can immediately go and try to do a pilot project with them. And as we went back to them, okay, we'd like to see this. We'd like to see your test results, not just what has already been done and what's been seen in the academic literature that you're going to replicate with us. We want to see what your results are. And then we go back to the lab space associated with all of the incubators. Oh, but we're not opening our lab spaces yet. So we had this situation where we're just running back and forth. Like I said, finally now we're going to be onboarding into lab space this month, but there was no way that we could really solve that issue there. So we were running back and forth, trying to figure out how to get into lab space. And there was no way to get into it. That was one of the major challenges that we faced.
I will add, and to give people some good feelings, that there is, I think, more funding opening up in terms of private investments, more VCs coming up that are interested in, purpose-driven businesses in different areas, whether it be sustainability or social or whatnot. But I think it has, from what I've seen, it's opening up, and there are a lot of, not a lot, but there are a few groups and organizations that are interested in, the bigger picture, beyond just the business, factors, but also how are these businesses that they're investing in going to be helping the world or pushing, different initiatives. So there is some hope and good things happening, just, I guess, not as much with government grants and funding.
Okay, so we're running a little short on time here, and we have many questions in the question and answer. So these aren't directed to anybody in particular. So any of you jump on the question if you want and answer quickly. Denise says, what is the best for the environment? Buying organic produce, beans and grains, etc., in plastic, or non-organic without plastic?
Well, it bugs me that organics are in plastic. It makes no sense. But from a health point of view, you might want the organic. So that's a tough one. I guess my response to that be, what are you going to do with the plastic? Can you reuse the plastic for something?
So I think this question is probably directed to Kaylee. Does the global warming potential cost of plastics include the impact of incineration or recycling? Probably in reference to that graphic that you were showing.
Yes, that graphic did include recycling. And that graphic was not to say that plastic is the solution. It was just to highlight that we cannot simply replace plastic with other materials without changing the way we're consuming.
So this question's for John. What form of energy do you use to make your products? And do you know the greenhouse gas emissions from your process?
The machinery is powered by electricity. At this point, we have not been able to come up with gas or something else, but I don't have a way to capture how much greenhouse gas, but it's not like we vent outside. It's very, very clean. We're in the space manufacturing. We've done some things to the automation to restrict the amount of potential emissions that can come off the machinery. So it's maybe a weak answer, but the answer is it's not like a lot of recyclers where they have a lot of environmental issues that they have to filter out before they can vent the building.
Yeah, and definitely being in Ontario, using our relatively clean energy grid probably helps with that as well. Another question here, is there a risk that, this question's for Gabriel, is there a risk that the microbes may turn out to be invasive in some way? I'm not sure if your research has touched on that at all.
So we get this question quite a bit. Our competitors have gotten the same questions. Well, we highly doubt something like that would happen. And when we talk about increasing the efficiency and the effectiveness of these microbes, it's not like if these microbes got out, it would completely, let's say, destroy the bumper on your car or something like that. It's not going to be something where it destroys something in a day, where it degrades the plastic in a day. But also these are going to be within MRFs, and they're going to be within bioreactors within MRFs. They're not going to be getting out and destroying all the plastics that we have within our environment.
Okay, Kaylee, on your slide with the Coke bottle, single-use aluminum can, and the statement that single-use plastics use less carbon, seems to be a dangerous slide, admitting that glass bottle can be reused multiple times. Maybe just comment on that. I think you did mention that that slide did include reuse. Would you just confirm that?
Yeah, so eventually a glass bottle can definitely be better from a carbon standpoint than a single-use item. It's just a matter of how many times it can be reused. So I believe that study found it was 12 times. So that's where we have to make sure that we're hitting those break-even points with the reusables that we're using.
Okay. Sorry, just filtering through here. From Beth Bauer, the story of plastic did an incredible job of describing the linear economy. Also watching Seaspiracy, the significance of industrial fishing and plastic pollution as being greater than that of single-use plastic pollution was highlighted. Could someone speak to the issue of plastics and industrial fishing? Yeah, Karen, if you want to go ahead.
Sure, yeah, just quickly, I mean, it is a huge problem, and it's a huge problem in the oceans. I think plastics are a huge problem, not only, like, so if we're saying industrial fishing equipment is a bigger problem than single-use plastics, I'd say that might be true for parts of the ocean, but probably not true for the globe as a whole. And there are discussions now underway to figure out how to ensure that the fishing equipment, when it goes back, comes out. When it goes out, into the ocean, that it comes back. But it is a big problem. And unfortunately, a lot of the seas are in international waters. And so this requires international cooperation. That's the kind of thing we have to get to in terms of plastics. In any case, is international cooperation, international treaty, but certainly the fishing gear will have to be covered under that treaty.
Okay, so question for you, John. You called your product lower grade lumber, but that 2x2 is not aesthetically unpleasing to me. This is from Mary. I would take a deck with that finish if it's not slippery when wet. Have you looked into landscaping applications for your products?
We did for a quick time. I must admit, I brought a pretty piece because it looked better, but because of our process, the color will shift. So from a furniture decking type of perspective, color is really important. And we're not coloring anything. We're not adding any chemicals or anything like that. So hence, it's just basically gray, but it shifts. So depends how picky you want to be on your deck. Maybe we can do something. The other thing is our products could maybe go underneath the deck and be part of the structure if you design it right. So it may not be the visible part, it would be the underpinnings.
Okay. Question for you here, Karen. How do we mobilize people to work toward achieving zero waste culture and the circular economy? So maybe what could we do as individuals to help in that effort?
Yeah, I would really say that we need, as I was mentioning before, we need the rules in place first to help change behavior. People are ready to change it, but we can't just do it out of the blue. So, talk to your elected officials about the need for rules that change the way packaging is designed and made, change the way products are sold, and really get out of single use, invest in reuse systems. That's what I would say that's what people can do, is help put pressure on the people who make those rules and regulations at the province, at the provincial level, at the federal level, to help create that kind of framework for change.
Okay, Gabriel, you wanted to jump in on that?
Definitely. So I agree with all of those. We definitely need to have tighter and stricter regulations. But I think another thing that complements that is trying to change the waste culture that we're in. So we definitely need to look at talking about greener ways and being more environmentally friendly within the education system. I believe there is a book that talks about it taking 3 generations to change a culture. I think that's something that we need to begin trying to implement as soon as possible, is ingraining this within our educational system as like an early stage education as possible, to ensure that as quickly as possible we can change the mindset of our people. And this is not just looking at Canada, this is not looking at the Turks and Caicos Islands, This is looking at it from a global lens and ensuring that we act as environmentally friendly as we possibly can.
So John, you brought up that you were working with some car companies and recycling some of their products. There's a specific question about fiber reinforced plastics and whether they are recyclable.
If it's a glass fiber, that damages our equipment. So we are not able to use a glass-filled type of plastic. Some people are, but it's a very specialized thing because the glass damages the equipment.
Okay. So I think we'll go, we're just coming up on 9 o'clock. We'll take about another 5 minutes if all the panelists are okay with that. But we certainly won't get through all of the questions. So like Tom mentioned at the beginning, we'll try to respond to those questions after the presentation. Nancy said, how do we make the story of plastics become part of the school curriculum? Maybe Karen, you could touch on that.
Yeah, well, but school curriculums tend to be set by provincial education ministries. So I guess talk to the curriculum. That's a hard thing, but I guess talk to your local teachers can always show it as well. I'm not an expert in changing curriculum, sorry, but I know it does happen through provincial, through the Ministry of Education.
Okay, so Robert asked, where the economies that existed when China and others were accepting our plastics for recycling, was that material not used by them for recycling? Why can't we do the same?
So if I remember correctly from the research I've done, I saw Karen also unmuted as well. A lot of that plastic was just not being used by China. A lot of it was not, it was simply waste product that China eventually said, you know what, our country is not a dump. We're not accepting this anymore. And I believe there were even times, I've seen other documentaries and other research, where even times when Canada and some other countries were sending waste that China would accept, they were including some of that waste material that China didn't want within that. And either China would have to hold on to it or send it back. But that's where the issue comes into place. We were treating China as a dumping ground, and China no longer wants to be a dumping ground. And now we have to figure out what to do with that waste that China had no way of dealing with either.
So another question from Robert here about the possibility of using waste plastics that can't be recycled under other means, whether they could be used for, for example, filler material for road asphalt. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of that possibility or not.
It can be done. I mean, similar to making it into lumber. I think where environmentalists get concerned about that stuff is if you have a lot of mixed plastics with toxic materials in it, if you're making the asphalt and then laying the asphalt down, it can be very dangerous for the workers who are dealing with the hot asphalt because it's giving off toxic emissions that they're breathing in. And then those roads that we all use every day, they break down, wear and tear, sun, rain, snow, freezing. And again, we'll release those toxins. So, you just want to be careful where things come from, right? So the other thing is apparently what the road builders will say is that it's just a really much more expensive process. So they won't do it unless somebody else pays for it.
Okay, Kaylee, maybe you could touch on this one. The question was specifically around what the producers of orange juice and other juices are doing for refillable containers, but maybe you could talk about beverage containers more broadly, what producers of beverage containers are doing to reduce their plastic consumption.
Yeah, so from a reuse perspective, that's really, where my expertise lies. I have seen a lot of interest from beverage producers. I think the struggle is that there's not a good infrastructure right now to collect back products. So that reverse logistics system, which is what we're trying to build, but it's not quite there yet for every product. And that's where there's a lot of challenges, because they could wash and reuse them in a lot of cases. But yeah, that's really the extent of what I know. I'm not sure about any recycling initiatives going on.
Okay, and then a question about which governments are responsible for plastics and what their responsibilities are, international, national, provincial, and municipal. Seems like, Karen, you might know the most about this.
Well, this is in the Canadian context, municipalities are responsible for collecting waste and waste management, but that's under provincial law. And then the federal government and the province is also responsible for pollution control. And the federal government shares that responsibility. But the interesting thing in Canada is that the federal government has listed plastic manufactured items as a toxic substance under the Environmental Protection Act. And so that means that Canada can now regulate on plastics. Internationally, they can regulate plastics. The federal government can regulate plastics as a pollutant. And that's really important because, that's where we'll get some nationwide standards on, for example, the single-use plastic bans will be nationwide, even though municipalities in some provinces have tried it. And that's great. It's good to have overarching national standards. It's better for retailers that work across the country, and it's really better for the environment if these things are covered across the country. Internationally, the United Nations Environment Assembly is meeting at the end of this month, and there is a proposal to strike a negotiating committee for a global treaty on plastics. And because plastics pollution knows no borders, it'll be really important. And in fact, plastic trade, both for waste, but also for just production, it crosses borders all the time. It's a very, very international market. A global treaty will be essential, I think, to ensuring that around the world we're coordinated in reducing our reliance on plastic. So there's a role for every level, basically.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we have reached our time. So I'll pass it over to Tom for some closing remarks.
Great. Thanks very much, Garner. I'm trying to turn my video on here. There we go. Thanks very much. Thanks to Garner and Stephanie. I know Stephanie's been working in the background there for getting those, there she is, getting all those questions compiled. So thanks very much. As Garner mentioned, we were not able to get all the questions answered tonight, but what I'm going to ask Garner and possibly Stephanie to do is perhaps take a look at the list of questions that were not answered, and then we can sort them and find out who perhaps the best one of our panelists or more than one might be able to answer them. We'll try to compile a list of answers and get those out to people. Hopefully we've covered a lot of the main questions, but I'm sure there's some that we'll try to investigate, do a little bit more investigation on. So thank you again to our panelists for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time, and you've added some great information to our event tonight. So we really appreciate you being here. Just going to do a share screen here as I finalize things here. So just to remind everybody, an email will be coming out to you in a couple of, by Monday at the absolute latest, I'll say Sunday or Monday. And in that email, there will be a link to a recording of this webinar and a document with a number of resources, including that how to sign up for the Plastics Free Challenge. We also have, for our panelists, they've agreed to allow us to provide their email addresses. So if there is a question, perhaps you didn't get a chance to ask or wasn't answered, you can always try sending that question directly to our panelists also, and they'll be happy to try to answer those for you. We'll also have a link to the feedback survey. If it doesn't pop up for you when you sign off tonight, we'll give you another chance to complete that for us. And also, we will be sending you some information about those of you who would like to show solidarity by supporting Indigenous members of Waterloo Region. We will definitely send that out to you. Finally, I would like to just say thank you to once again to our all of our panelists and for the people in the Nith Valley Eco Boosters Education Working Group who helped to put this together. A number of people further in the background that none of you saw tonight. So thank you to all of those people who helped out tonight. As I said at the beginning, the story of plastic is a depressing movie in many, many ways, but I hope that we have helped to see or to help you to understand or to see a little bit of the hope, a little bit of the light that's coming in the future, especially from some of the panelists today who have told us about their businesses and things that they're working on. So again, thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. And we will get that email out to you in the next couple of days. And hopefully we won't get too much snow. I know Gabriel doesn't have to worry about the snow down in the Turks and Caicos, but the rest of us have to worry about a little bit more snow coming, Gabriel. So hopefully it's not too much. So thank you everybody for joining us and good night.